Well, before I get started, let me say thank you for the opportunity to be here today. When I read about the position, I was very excited. I thought this was be a very challenging, interesting, exciting position, and look forward to the interview. Very quickly, let me give you just a little bit of an outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give you a little bit of my personal background and some of my experiences. You already heard some of that. I'm going to address what I think are some of the issues and challenges that we deal with. Everybody knows the big issue is money, but how are we going to deal with that? What are some of the things we're going to try to do to address that? Then give you a little bit what is my vision for what the experiment station should be about. And then I think probably what most of you are more interested in is a little bit about my personal approach. How do I do things, and how do I approach my colleagues? And then hopefully at the end we'll have an opportunity for some questions and discussion. My educational experience, as you already heard, and got my BS degree in biology in 1978 from Edinburgh State University in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has a very extensive state university system. There are 16 universities in their state system. When I was there, it was actually a state college. It's now a university. The BS is in biology, but in most institutions it would have been a botany degree. I took a lot of plant science classes, and I was tutored and mentored by the plant science faculty there. And then in 1983, I got my PhD in plant pathology from the University of Massachusetts. I fell in love with New England doing some camping and some canoeing up there, and felt like I really wanted to go and live in New England for a few years. And Massachusetts had at that time a very prominent plant pathology program. Most of you probably won't know George Agrios, who wrote the textbook on plant pathology, was there at that time. And an opportunity to study under him, I couldn't resist, so ended up at the University of Massachusetts. And that year, 1983, I got my degree. It was actually given to me in January, and I spent the year 1983 at the University of Massachusetts as a faculty member, a soft money faculty member. Right as I got my degree, one of the faculty members became interim assistant director of the experiment station in Massachusetts. They needed somebody to fill in and teach his classes, so I taught 2 classes and directed the departmental seminar. And also the soft money came from, we had a alfalfa IPM project that I was the plant pathology scientist on that IPM project. And I took that position under the caveat, if I got a real job that was going to tenure me, could I leave? And they said certainly. And then in 1984, January of 1984, I started at the LSU Ag Center at the Red River Research Station, which is located in South Bossier City. I was hired. In my job description, it said they wanted me to develop a plant pathology program on production-limiting diseases of cotton, soybeans, corn, and wheat. The emphasis was on cotton, and so I probably spent 70 to 75% of my time for the next 25 years doing cotton pathology work. Worked a lot with soil-borne diseases, seedling diseases, nematodes, and fusarium wilt. I also, during that time, had some other projects. I had a project on alfalfa. When some of the faculty at LSU saw that I worked on an alfalfa IPM project, they felt that I could contribute to their program, so I worked there briefly. And we had at one time a field tomato program, and I had a project working on diseases of field-grown tomatoes. A little bit more background. I've been somewhat successful with grants. In 1991 through 93, I was on a low input sustainable ag grant, which back then they called LISA grants. And that was in cooperation with some scientists from the University of Arkansas. And that was my first introduction to the University of Arkansas. And during the course of that grant, I came to Fayetteville on more than one occasion and always liked Fayetteville. And the opportunity to come back here is very appealing to me. After that, I had a couple Southern Regional IPM grants. The first one dealt with the field-grown tomato project that we worked on. And then the second one was a cotton IPM project looking at seedling disease, early season insects, and nematodes. Almost throughout my entire career at LSU, I've had commodity board support of one sort or another, with the exception of the first couple years that I was there. So I've been very engaged with the commodity boards and addressing a lot of their plant pathology issues over the years. And of course, numerous unrestricted grants, probably in excess of $1 million or so over the course of that 25-year period. I also served on various grant panels. The first one was in 1994 with the USDA SBIR grant panel, and then followed with some other panels, the Southern Region and Pesticide Impact in '95. In 1996, the Cotton Foundation approached me and asked me to serve on a panel. They were trying to identify some of their research priorities for the next 5 to 10 years and asked me to serve on that panel, which was very interesting. If you know about the Cotton Foundation, they're pretty in-house on how they do a lot of things, and the opportunity to work with them was very interesting. In 2002, I was invited by the Australia Cotton Foundation to come to Australia and spend a few weeks with them reviewing their cotton fusarium wilt program. In Australia, in the early 90s, they started to experience a very serious problem with fusarium wilt. They had some new races that were very devastating, and I was one of the few people that had an active fusarium wilt program in the U.S., and they asked me to come and review their program. Not only was it interesting from a scientific perspective and a production perspective, because in Australia it's very different. Everything is irrigated. If they don't have water, they don't grow cotton. But also just from a cultural perspective, the opportunity to visit Australia was very interesting. And then in 2003, I was on the USDA car ramp panel. I think the reason I highlight the panels, I think panels are very interesting in that they shed light on how these panels work and some of the things they're looking for in your proposals. And I learned a lot from those experiences. And so it enabled me to have a better feel for how proposals are put together and how they're selected. And I think that can be helpful to us. Also very active in professional societies with journals. I was senior editor for 3 years with Plant Disease. For those of you that aren't plant pathologists, Plant Disease is one of the premier journals of the American Phytopathological Society, along with Phytopathology is the other journal. Plant Disease is the more applied journal of that society. I started out, I was a technical editor for the Journal of Cotton Science, and I ended up being editor-in-chief of that journal for a 5-year period. The journal was going through a little bit of a growth spurt at that time. There was a lot of pressure to move articles through a little quicker, and with my experience as a technical editor, they asked me to serve in that capacity. At one time, I was chairman of that editorial board. I'm still on that board. I'm not the chairman anymore, but I still serve in that capacity. The Journal of Cotton Science, you might say, is a little bit of a baby of mine. I've been with it for so long and engaged in every facet of that journal. And then I served a 3-year term as one of the editors for the journal Louisiana Agriculture. It is a Ag Center publication. It's put out quarterly that highlights, research and extension programs that we have going on in the state. Some leadership background. I was a member of the 1996-97 SCOP-ACOP Leadership Development Program that is now referred to as LEAD 21. It's the same program. And then last year I just completed the Food Systems Leadership Program. So I always like to joke, when I was first asked to attend these events, I didn't know if I was done something wrong and they were trying to train me, or if they saw something in me that they thought had leadership potential. As you already heard, my administrative experience in 2008, I became the regional director and coordinator for the Red River Research Station, and was responsible for budgetary, personnel, and programmatic activities. When this position first came open, I had a little bit of an interest in it, but ended up applying after several of the faculty members encouraged me to do this. They felt that I could provide the leadership they needed. They approached me, encouraged me to apply, and at that time I felt like I needed to go ahead and at least look at the possibility of a career in administration. The Northwest region is the dark region up in the upper left-hand column of the state, and to clarify, when I first became regional director, we had 7 regions, and I only had 7 parishes. About 6 months into the job, they decided we only needed 5 regions, and they added 5 more parishes. So I had initially 7 parishes and 2 research stations, and in 6 months in, I had 12 parishes and 4 research stations. The 4 research stations The one where I was housed for 25 years and was the premier station when I became a Northwest director was the Red River Research Station. It's primarily a row crop station, cotton, corn, soybeans, but we also have a rather extensive greenhouse tomato program there. We have about 12,000 square foot under greenhouse tomatoes, and it's we sell some of the tomatoes to the public that come out of the research, and they're very popular. Most of the folks in the Bossier City area know about Red River Research Station tomatoes. They're very good, and we sell them at a nominal price, and we use it to help support that research program. The Pecan Research and Extension Center is in Shreveport, just across, as the crow flies, just across the river from the Red River Station, but to get there you have to go all the way up across the bridge and go over. It is strictly a pecan station. That is all they do there. It's about 120 acres of pecans, and it's one of the only pecan stations till you have to go all the way to Georgia to find another station that's dedicated that much resource to pecans. The station that was added when we expanded was the Hill Farm Research Station. Hill Farm is primarily a beef cattle operation, but we also have a forestry program there, and the scientist there does a lot of work with the forestry folks at Monticello. They are on an AFRI grant or two, I think, together, so there is a good connection there between that station and Monticello. And we also have 2 poultry demonstration houses. Unlike you, our poultry program is very small, and the extent of it is we have 1 extension agent and these 2 poultry demonstration houses. That's all we have. Although poultry is the second leading agricultural enterprise in Louisiana behind forestry. But this is just the course we've taken over the years. We have a minimal program there. The last station is Calhoun Research Station. Calhoun years ago was a horticulture station. They did cowpeas, watermelons, blackberries, peaches. But over the years, we sort of moved out of the horticultural sphere. We actually do very little research or programming in that area, and it's now a forest products lab. We have 2 scientists there. The main thrust of their program is taking treated wood and figuring out how we can reuse that wood. Technically, because it's treated, you shouldn't be throwing it in landfills, and so we're trying to find a solution how to handle that wood. I also have responsibility for extension programs in these 12 parishes. Agriculture, natural resources, 4-H youth development, family consumer sciences are all in there. Different parishes have different makeups. Some have agents that handle all 3, an agent for each responsibility. Some of them maybe only have 2 agents, and a lot of our agents now have some split appointments. They may be 25 or 30% FCS and 70% 4-H. It just depends. It's varied amongst the 12 parishes. I also have a lot of responsibility at the State Fair. The Louisiana State Fair is located in Shreveport, Louisiana. It's held every year in late October, early November, and we have a very big footprint there. We have, of course, the livestock show. We have a lot of quiz bowls there. We have the competitive exhibits, the canning, the sewing, the needlework competitive exhibits. We have some BB gun and bow and arrow contests there. And we also have what we call Ag Magic. I think you have a similar program in Arkansas, but Ag Magic is a program to educate and inform people about the importance of agriculture and natural resources in their daily lives. And we set this up for the whole 3 weeks of the State Fair. We literally have thousands of people that come through and see some of the exhibits and some of the displays we have. And then for 4 days during the last week, we have school groups that come through. We target 3rd and 4th graders. They come through and they actually get to do a lot of hands-on experiences, planting seeds, digging up onions and potatoes, ginning cotton. They actually get to see how cotton is ginned, and we explain to them how it's used to make fabrics and so forth. A very big outreach program for us, and we get a lot of positive feedback about Ag Magic. In fact, when we put this year's registration up we do it online, within the first hour we had about 20 hits already of schools registering their kids to come to this event. So it's a big deal for us. In 2011, I became interim associate director in January of this past year. I'm still in that capacity. I wear two hats. I am the interim associate director, and I still work the Northwest region of the state. I spend 2 or 3 days a week in Baton Rouge in this capacity, and I spend the rest of the week in my region doing my regional responsibilities. Let me give you a little bit of background about the Ag Center before I get to my responsibilities. We're very similar to the Division of Agriculture here. We call our head of the Ag Center as the chancellor rather than the president, and then we have vice chancellors and directors for each, the experiment station and the cooperative extension service, and then under that we have the various associate vice chancellors and assistant vice chancellors. We have in the Ag Center, we have our own accounting, we have our own sponsored programs, human resources, intellectual property. We also have a communications division that are strictly for the Ag Center. They have nothing to do with the main campus. We have right now 18 experiment stations and 11 academic departments. I will say to you, this is in a little bit of flux right now. If I had put this slide together a month ago, I would have told you it was 20 experiment stations. We closed 2 very recently, and we're actually considering a couple more. Also, of those 18 that are surviving, we're combining some of the administrative activities for some of those in an attempt to save dollars. Instead of having an accountant and an administrator at each one of those stations, we're going to have 2 or 3 that are going to have 1. Same with academic departments. We just combined vet science and animal science. We're down to 10 departments now. Depending how the budget goes over the next 12 months, all this may change. We have 2 institutes, the Audubon Sugar Institute and the Calgary Environmental Center. The Audubon Sugar Institute was the original experiment station in Louisiana. In 1887, when the Hatch Act was passed, it was the original experiment station. It is primarily involved in processing of sugar cane. Okay? They have a pilot plant there, and they do all sorts of work to try to improve the efficiency of getting the sugar out of the cane. The Calgary Environmental Center is primarily involved with water quality and water issues, and also looking at biofuel and biodiesel activities. Most of all that work is carried out there. They also do have some labs there. They do some tissue and soil analysis. My responsibilities there, I provide oversight for research programs. Every faculty member in the Ag Center that has an Ag Center appointment is required to have a research project. We still do a lot of the reviewing and evaluation of projects at the director level, and I'm responsible for all of that. And relate to that, I review and approve all Hatch, McIntyre, Stennis, and state research projects. The way we do it, they submit them to me, we get internal reviews, I summarize the reviews and then submit it back to the faculty member to make those additions or corrections. I also liaise with department heads, regional directors regarding programmatic, budgetary, and personnel issues. This is more or less a shared responsibility between the director of the experiment station and myself, depending on our availability, our schedules, our calendars. He may do that on some occasions they come directly to me. I also provide institute review of all grant proposals. I have signature authority for the chancellor. I essentially have to sign off on all grants, either myself or the director. We don't obviously get an opportunity to review every grant to every detail, but we do look at budgets. We do consider what they're proposing the Ag Center is going to provide to make sure that they're not going way out on a limb on what we can do. And also, we take a real close look at the faculty member and make sure that he's qualified to do the work he's proposing. We want to be very careful not to have our faculty just chasing dollars. We want to make sure that they can do that job. I also provide leadership for our special research grants. We had several special research grants the last few years. Of course, most of you all know they're all going to go away. These so-called earmarks are going to disappear. So that is one responsibility that'll most likely be no longer in my portfolio. I also interact and represent the director's office with the various stakeholder groups. I spend a lot of time communicating with the various commodity groups, and the Farm Bureau. Is not unusual for me to talk to somebody at Farm Bureau on almost a weekly basis. A lot of the commodity boards, we are the ones that put the RFPs together and send out the notices to the faculty. to prepare their proposals. That is all done out of the Associate Director's office. Okay, so let me switch gears a little bit and let's talk a little bit about where we are in the experiment station and what I see as some of our issues and challenges. This is wording that came out of the original Hatch Act to conduct original researches or verify experiments bearing directly upon the agriculture industry of the United States. There's another quote in there that talks about to aid in acquiring and diffusing among the people of the United States useful and practical information on subjects connected with agriculture and to promote scientific investigation and experiment respecting the principles and application of agricultural science. All of that is still true today, but I think all of us know that it has been greatly expanded. We're looking at things like food processing and food quality and sustainability of the environment and clean water and water quality issues and all sorts of things, economics, everything else that falls under this umbrella. And it's reflected in the various departments and stations that we have, not only in Arkansas, but in Louisiana and all the other states. And so when I talk about our role and our responsibility, I'll often use the word agriculture, but I'm talking about this whole big picture. I'm not just talking about production agriculture. What do I see as some of our challenges? We have the very traditional challenges that all of us are familiar with, and that's this whole idea of crop productivity and pest management. And I think one of the interesting things here, if you look at, study very closely what the census is saying about world population, in the next 40 years they're guessing that population is going to increase up to about 9 billion. And there's a lot of question about our availability to feed 9 billion people. With some of the other issues we're dealing with, loss of farmland and some of those things, how is this going to happen? And a lot of people, they look back, they look at our history and they say, well, over the last 40 years, we did a tremendous job increasing productivity. In some instances, 100 and 200% did we improve things like production of corn and soybeans and some of these other commodities. But I think the challenge, what's implied in all this when they talk about this and they think, well, we can do it, we've done it before, the idea is that experiment stations are still going to exist and be very functional and be able to meet the demands. And that's a nice thing to hear. And so we just hope that the funding reflects that and that we are still able to meet that demand. We've got all kinds of issues with food safety now that we're dealing with. I don't know if it's the 24-hour news cycle or not, but it seems like contaminated food issues seem to be cropping up a lot more frequently these days. And I think that's a big area that we're going to continue to address in the very near future. We have all sorts of animal rights issues, slaughter bans, harvest bans, and we've got the CAFO problems, okay, contained animal feeding operations. There's a lot of issues there, not only from an animal rights issue, but also from an environmental issue. You know, a lot of people think that the way we treat these animals is not right and that we need to change that. And then on top of that, you throw in issues with air and water quality. CAFO operations are going to be a big issue for us in the near future. We also have under environmental this National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. This is a new regulation requiring permits for just about everything related to agriculture. And it's going to cause us some issues that we're going to have to be prepared to address in the near future. All kinds of green issues. There's always been a sort of a low underkey of organic interest, and I think that interest continues to grow and expand. We've got a whole big local foods issue. Everybody wants to be involved in local foods, and I think some of our programs are going to have to meet that demand and address that need. Carbon credits, and of course the big biofuel issue that everybody's trying to address in their states these days. We got all kind of urban issues, right to farm issues, odor ordinances, all sorts of things. When I came to the Red River Research Station in South Bossier 25 years ago, we were pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Now we have a brand new high school that's less than half a mile away. We have a housing development on the north side. We have another development across the highway from us. And we're starting to deal with some of these farming issues. I'll give you one quick little thing we're dealing with. Every summer we put out these propane cannons to keep the birds out of our sorghum plots. And the first couple times we did that, we would start getting all these phone calls, and people would call the sheriff's office, and the sheriff would come out and talk to us about the noise. This was a noise factor that we had to address. So what we've had to do, we've now put the sorghum plots as far away from this development as we can to try to muffle the sound a little bit. And of course, when we put them out, we call the sheriff now and explain to them what's going on, don't get too excited. But these are kind of issues, not only for us as a research station, but farmers in general are dealing with as we get this urban rural encroachment. Especially in ethnic-based markets, as the demographics of the country changes, there's a lot more interest in some of these ethnic foods. For example, in Louisiana, there's a big interest in goat meat now. And we don't do the goat research, but the Southern University, our 1890 school, is heavily engaged in research on goat meat and goat production. And there's all sorts of other specialty and ethnic things that are going to go on. Bottom line, the way I see it, and regardless of what these issues are, whether they're traditional issues, new issues, whatever we're dealing with, I think they're going to be solved through research and development, provided primarily through our extension service and our experiment stations. And I think this is one of the things where we really have to do a better job of making sure that we educate and inform the public about what we do. Okay, we have the ability and the capability to address all of these problems, but I'm not sure that the people, the stakeholders, the legislators, and some of those people truly understand all the time what it is we really do. And we have to do continue. I think we've done a good job with it, educating and informing these people, but we have to continue to do that. And I think in relation to this, sometimes it's a real simple thing. I talked about the kids who come to Ag Magic. You might be surprised, some of these kids have no idea where milk comes from or where eggs come from or any of those sorts of things. So it's a very simple education. You know, here's a chicken, here's an egg, this is where you get the egg from. But also, I think there's, in some regard, there's a fair amount of apathy out there. We've made it really pretty easy. We've had a very plentiful food supply, a very safe food supply. The environment, for the most part, is in pretty good shape. And I think a lot of people just assume that that's easy. You know, we don't have to worry about it too much. And they don't realize all the research and work that goes on behind to make those things happen. And I think we have to continue to inform and educate about that. I think, obviously, and I alluded to this before, certainly our biggest challenge is funding. Where are we going to get the funding to continue our programs? I think we all would agree in this room, if you throw enough money at us, we can make all this stuff happen and we won't have any issues. But I think we have to be honest with ourselves, that's not going to happen. We continue to see federal funding being chopped. Every time there's a new farm bill, they have to revisit all the NIFA funding and all the other various programs and how they're going to fund them, and we're never quite sure where we're going to end up. The trend is obviously down. Okay, there's going to be less federal funding. There's this big interest in shifting from capacity funds to competitive funding. And not that I'm afraid of competitive funding, but we have to maintain capacity funds. That is the way we're going to establish and fortify our foundation and our basic structure. If we're going to be able to address needs as they come along and have an impact in the community, we have to have those capacity funds because they allow us that flexibility to address our programs and move as we see needs. If we have to go find a grant every time a new need develops, we're going to have a very difficult time meeting that need. Elimination of special grants, earmarks. For some people, that's not such a bad thing. If you're a state that got a lot of earmark money, it's pretty rough. All of a sudden, you've lost a big source of money, and you have to try to find where you're going to make that money up. We had some specialty grant money for termite control, and we're struggling now. How are we going to handle that program? Because it's still really important to us in Louisiana. Ask the folks in New Orleans how they like dealing with termites, and every one of them will tell you it's a major issue for them. So we're going to have to find a way to fund that without the earmark money. This past year, when they eliminated a lot of the earmarks, they put a little bit of extra money into hatch funds, so it wasn't a total loss of that, but certainly the amount we got in Louisiana for hatch funds didn't make up for our earmark or specialty grant money. State funding, I put up here flat at best because in Arkansas, that's essentially where you've been. Most of you who sat with me today know in Louisiana, we are now in our third year of cuts. We're down 28%. Because of a 28% cut, we've also had a hiring freeze. We've had 2 early buyouts. and as a result, we're down about 300 faculty members in the entire Ag Center, Research and Extension. And we're finding now that that's not very sustainable. We can't continue down that path. We're starting to develop a lot of holes in our programs, and we know we have some needs there we're going to have to address. And we're actually starting in the process now of identifying 5 to 6 key positions that we think we can fill. So how are we going to address this, even amongst reduced funding? We're going to have to find some ways to carry on. We can't just give up the ship because there's not as much money there. I think one of the things we have to do is strengthen our core programs. And to do that, I think there's 2 things we have to do. We have to get with our faculty and our department heads, and we have to understand what are their strengths, what are their constraints, and what are their needs. If you're going to ask a department or a faculty member to pursue a specific research area, we have to make sure that we have the capacity to do that. You know, we can't just ask somebody to do something they've never done before. So we have to understand, if we're going to strengthen our core programs, I think as Director of the Experiment Station, I have to have a good understanding of what it is the faculties and department are dealing with and what is their status, so that we can find out where we need to make some strategic hires or using our resources to bolster those areas. I think we also need to think very closely about aligning some of our activities with the Science Roadmap for Food and Agriculture. That was recently revised and put out in late 2010. And if you know anything about it, they've identified 7 grand challenges, okay? And they've identified specific research areas that they feel that we need to be addressing nationally. And I think it would behoove us to make sure that we are familiar with that roadmap and are looking at aligning some of our programs to address those grand challenges, they so call them. I think we also need to make sure that we're aligned with your very own Division of Agriculture Blueprint for Excellence. I think that's a no-brainer, but I just wanted to make a reminder that oftentimes strategic plans get drawn up and they get put on a shelf and nobody really follows up on them. And I think we need to, as an institution, make sure that we follow that up and engage our programs with that Blueprint for Excellence. And I think lastly, we have to find a way to make sure that we align our stakeholders and our faculty and departments with the stakeholders and with funding potential and research impact. I've read repeatedly over the last year or so, there's a lot more emphasis now on what is the impact of what we're doing. You know, we're throwing a lot of federal money at research programs, and are we truly having an impact? And I think we have to make sure that our research in some capacity is going to have an impact. And there's certainly a lot of emphasis on economic development and an impact there. And I think we have to start looking at our programs and seeing how we can align what we're doing to have an impact at some point. I don't think by any means, and I'm not suggesting that you have to have 100% of all these factors. There are some issues out there that there may not be a lot of funding potential, but you have a lot of stakeholder involvement and you have a lot of potential for impact. So you have to look at sort of a balance of these things in deciding where you're going to go with your research programs. In addition to that, I think in addition to strengthen core programs, we have to look at faculty development. One of the things that we've been pushing a lot in the Ag Center is grant training workshops, mostly for younger faculty. We feel that a lot of the younger faculty coming in don't have a lot of experience in this area, and we feel that they may pay a bonus for us and allow them to be much more effective. We've also toyed with the idea, if we ever come up with a little extra money, getting some external grant reviews. You know, where we would pay a small stipend to outside individuals to take a look at grant proposals and let us know where they think the strengths of the proposal are, where the weaknesses are, so that we can maybe do some adjustments before we actually submit the grant. The problem with this approach, one for us right now, is we don't have just a lot of money to do this, but secondly, most grant proposals get submitted literally about the last hour, and trying to have time to get external reviews may be pie in the sky. But we certainly have contemplated making that offer, and I think it's something worth investigating. I think we need to look more at regional and multi-state projects. I don't know how it is in Arkansas and Louisiana. We don't have a lot of our faculty engaged in these multi-state and regional projects, and We think they're important for a number of reasons. One is it helps them to network with colleagues who are working in a similar area. And we think that pays a lot of bonuses in relation to developing research programs that have impact, and also in the granting capacity. Everybody knows most of these big grants want multi-state, multi-discipline type proposals, and if you're engaged in these multi-state projects, it may be a little easier to get this multi-state component handled because you know these people, you've been on this project with them. Professional societies, I think this is a no-brainer, but we really like our faculty be engaged with professional societies. Once again, it provides a networking opportunity to get to know what their colleagues are doing and what sort of issues they're dealing with out there. In most instances, I say this is a pretty straightforward one. Most faculty are engaged in their professional societies. But one of the things we've started seeing in Louisiana is because they can no longer travel out of state on state money, they have to come up with their own funding to do this. And some faculty members, because they don't have a lot of funding, have started to forego attending professional meetings. And I think we need to find a way to make sure they still have that opportunity. Lastly, we have this idea of exchange groups. In Louisiana, we have what we call ACE groups, Ag Center Exchange Groups. And what we do with these groups, we take scientists who are working with the same commodity or working in the same discipline or working on a similar project, and we put them together in a room. We ask them to meet twice a year. And what we ask them to do is look at their programs and help us identify what their constraints are, what their needs are, what kind of things can we do in administration to help them with their programs. We feel that by putting them together, where they're working on this problem together, they can use these resources a little more wisely because they can share them and so forth. And we won't be just looking at one person in one program. We'll have a group that sees this as an opportunity. We all know that resources are going to be tight, and the opportunity to share them, I think, is something we need to look at very closely. We also need to look at some of our collaborations. Multi-state partnerships. There are a couple existing models out there that I think are very worthy. One that we have in Louisiana that we share with Mississippi. Southeast Louisiana is a big dairy area. We used to have a lot of dairies there. Numbers are dwindling. But we have a dairy research station there. And the folks across the border in Mississippi, they had an interest in some dairy work, but didn't have the funds to do a big development of a dairy research facility. So what we've done is we provide the dairy expertise, the folks in Mississippi provide the beef cattle expertise, and we just share across the lines there. And the beef and dairy producers in that area, they're all involved and engaged in this process. And so we didn't have to go out and make a big investment in beef cattle. We just, at least in that area of the state, we do have some in other parts of the state, but we just get the expertise from Mississippi. Another example is Tennessee and Kentucky. They share some activity related to tobacco research. Kentucky hired the researcher and Tennessee hired the extension specialist, and they work together and share information across that border. I did have the opportunity this past summer, administrators for the experiment station and extension service in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas, we met in Vicksburg to talk about, are there some other multi-state partnerships we can develop here? So far, I'm not aware of anything's come out of that, Nathan, specifically. I know we tossed around a lot of ideas. One of the ideas we had was we have all this pecan expertise, and you have an interest in Arkansas on pecans, and what's the possibility of maybe we train an extension agent in pecans, they come to Louisiana, we train them, and we send our scientists up once or twice a year to do a workshop or some kind of seminar on pecan production. That way you don't have to invest in a big pecan operation, and we can assist with that. And then in reverse of that, we have a very small poultry activity. We have essentially one extension agent doing poultry work. And with your extensive poultry activity, maybe you could share some of your poultry expertise with us. And I think there's lots of other opportunities. There are things with catfish and sweet potatoes and some of those things that we could share some of our resources. Regionalization of programs. I think there are some things out there that we consider just beyond multi-state, but within the entire region. I view cotton, for example, as a regional crop. It's a southeast United States crop. Yeah, there's some in California and the Southwest, but they don't grow cotton like we do. And I think the Cotton Foundation has actually done a very good job of regionalizing some research projects related to cotton. They've gone and they'll get a scientist from 8 to 10 states and ask them to all work together to solve a problem or an issue. And I think that's a good sort of an example of regionalization that we need to be thinking more about. You think of things like sweet potatoes. Probably 3/4 of sweet potatoes in the U.S. are grown in Louisiana, Arkansas, and Mississippi. So we don't need to go very far to share that expertise. If you take North Carolina out of the picture, almost all of them are grown in those 3 states. So there is some opportunity there that I think we need to think about. I think we also have to look at our cooperation with our 1890 universities. I don't know what the situation is with Pine Bluff here. We have a bit of a relationship with Southern University, which is our 1890 university. We actually house 1890 agents in our extension offices around the state of Louisiana. And it actually has been very positive in that it allows them to know what our programs are and we understand what their programs are. And it's not unusual in some of those parishes where they do joint projects together, things on nutrition and obesity and things like that, that they do programs together, the Southern and the LSU agent working together. In our 1890 University and Southern University, there's 2 areas that they excel in that we've pretty much allowed them to handle. One is goat production. I've alluded to that already. They have a very extensive program. We have a scientist who works with them on almost a daily basis, but the bulk of that program is run through their offices. They also have a much bigger textile program. We have almost a non-existent textile program at LSU. So all the textile work comes through the 1890 University. And lastly, our relationship between research and extension. And it sounds like from everything I can hear, there's a very good positive relationship between research and extension in Arkansas. We have, I think, a very good relationship in Louisiana. One of the reasons we went to the regionalization in Louisiana was to help blur the lines between research and extension. When you went to this regional concept, you had a regional director that handled all of the research and extension in that area. And when you're an administrator and you have both of them, you don't get to play favorites very much. You have to address both of them. And that's helped to create a better atmosphere, I think, between research and extension. One of the things I also did when I became the regional director, one of the first things I did is I got the A&R agents and the research scientists from the stations together in a room, and I challenged them to develop some protocols and some procedures to help foster a better relationship between research and extension. And they now meet once or twice a year. Usually during that meeting they try to do some kind of workshop where the scientists are showing the extension agents how to do certain things, how to identify an insect or how to identify a disease, those sorts of things. They've done grafting workshops, all sorts of things. Also, the other things come out of it, they now work together on all variety testing. Before, the research scientists did variety testing on the stations, the extension agents did variety testing on the producer fields, and they never really crossed paths. Now, whenever they do these variety trials on the station, the extension agent is there, he has a plot plan, he can go out there and look at these trials anytime he wants, and vice versa. When we put a demonstration trial on a producer's farm, the research scientist knows where it is and he can go look at it whenever he wants. And I think that's really improved that relation, that give and take between research and extension. One of the reasons I point out all these things, strengthen collaborations, is I think, A, it once again can help strengthen our ability to have an impact. When you have multi-institutional and disciplines and everything else involved, I think you have a much better opportunity to interact and create more of an impact. Also, all of us know if you're going to be submitting grants that want multi-state, multi-discipline, want an 1890 involvement and want an extension outreach component, you better have these collaborations in place. If you try to establish them at the last minute, right before you submit the grant, you can forget about it. Most of the time when you read a grant, when you do it at the last minute, you can tell pretty quick that there's not really a lot of substance here. One of the grant panels I was on several years ago, we got down to the last few proposals that we wanted to evaluate. And what we started looking at real close was the outreach on them. And I can tell you, we threw out 2 proposals because the outreach was very weak. They basically said, we're going to have a field day. And we just went, well, okay, big deal. Whereas one of the proposals, their outreach, they were going to do all kinds of email newsletters and create all kinds of pamphlets and calculators for the producers to use, and we just felt like that we have to go with that one. So I think these components are very important if we're going to be competitive on that national level. We have to strengthen our ties with stakeholders, and there's several things we must know about them. One is, who are they? And I think all of you in this room could tell me, commodity boards, Farm Bureau, legislatures, crop consultants, all sorts of groups that you can name, but I'll present to you, it's basically everybody. If they pay taxes, they're one of our constituents, and we need to at least hear what they have to say. And I think that's really important for us. We also have to know what they need, how their needs change, and how to best help them. And my feeling is all these can most best be answered by communication. And you can communicate a lot of different ways. You can make the personal visit, although we're finding that to be a much bigger challenge for us. With the reduction in number of agents and so forth, we can't be everywhere all the time. So we have to start looking at things, print, various events, field days, workshops, whatever you want to call them. But I think the way of the future is electronic communication, whether it be emails, Facebook, blogs, you name it. There's a very interesting communication that's being developed right now in Louisiana. Rick Cartwright is on this proposal. One of our extension agents got a grant to do what they're calling Rice Scout. And essentially what this proposal is going to do is going to create an app on your iPhone you can go to, and it'll help you identify rice diseases and rice insects and weeds in rice fields and all that sort of thing. To me, it's just truly a fascinating approach. You know, I've seen many a producer got the book on the dash of his truck and he's thumbing through it. In the future, he can just pull out his iPhone and click on this app and probably get an answer a lot quicker. I think that's going to be very interesting. We also have to make sure we connect our departments and researchers with clientele groups. This may seem really simplistic, and I think a lot of people say, duh, okay. But I'll tell you a story. We have a representative from Shreveport, inner city Shreveport, and every year before the legislative session starts, he walks to Baton Rouge from Shreveport. Okay? It takes him about 2 weeks. And he does it, he says, to promote childhood obesity and autism. Well, the first year when he did this, I said, well, I'm going to get his attention real fast. I walked 10 miles with this guy. You talk about a captive audience. Me and him and his number one man, the three of us walking down the highway. Well, I informed him about a lot of our programs that dealt with nutrition and obesity. Told him about SNAP-Ed and FNAP. Told him about our FCS program with Smart Portions and Smart Bodies. I told him all about our community garden program, and he was amazed. He looked at me and he said, I didn't know you did any of that stuff. This is a legislature, mind you. This is somebody who should really know our programs. He votes on our budget every year. He had no idea. So after the 10-mile walk, while he was still walking to Baton Rouge, I sent him an email, identified agents in the region that could address these things. Now, every few months or so, I get an email or a phone call from him. Tell me about this program, or do you have somebody that can help with this? So this connection isn't always as obvious as we think it is. And I think we have to continue to look at that and try to find ways to connect our researchers with these various groups. So, in summary, the way to, I think, be successful with our research programs, we have to facilitate the faculty for success. Some of the things I talked about, trying to make sure they have the resources they need whenever we can provide them. We have to align our programs with various strategic plans. I named two, the roadmap and the blueprint for excellence, but our Farm Bureau every year gives us a list of what they think are research priorities. I think we need to look at all of them and consider them in our programs. Establish these effective collaborations. As I said, these collaborations are going to help us have more impact because we'll have several scientists working together and not one guy out there on his own. Engage our stakeholders, no-brainer. We have to do that every way we can and communicate with them every way we can. And my feeling is if we do all this, then our programs will be properly aligned for greatest impact, will address stakeholder needs, and be positioned for success of obtaining extramural funding. Not that everything we have to do has to be obtain extramural funding, but we at least have to think about how we can position ourselves to be better able to achieve that. If we do all that, I think we can achieve what I'll call my vision right now, and that is we want the Division of Agriculture to be an organization that is engaged in agricultural research for food and fiber production, processing, and research for sustaining our natural resources and all these adjunct sciences we're talking about on the local, regional, national arenas, and that we deliver expertise that directly addresses our stakeholder needs. This is in a nutshell what I think where we need to be and what we need to be doing. So, having said all that, let me switch gears just a little bit, talk a little bit about who I am and what I would do as a director. First is I would advocate, obviously, for the Division of Administration at every level. We do all sorts of things on a daily basis. We meet with legislators, Farm Bureau, all these sorts of things. One of the things we do at the Red River Research Station to advocate for the Ag Center is we have a monthly, what we call Lunch and Ag Discovery. For a nominal $5 fee, we invite the general public to come out. We feed them a lunch. We give them a nice sandwich or a soup or a chili or a gumbo, a salad, a nice cold drink, a dessert, and we talk about Ag Center programs. A lot of these people have no idea who we are and what we do. They come to these lunch and Ag Discovery things, and they've learned a whole lot about what we do. And I think we need to continue those sorts of things. Be committed to our stakeholders for success. As I said before, they pay the taxes that pay for our organization, and I think we need to be committed to them on some level. Obviously, we can't address every need of every stakeholder, but we need to make sure that we are engaged on some level with our stakeholders. We have to prioritize planning and implementation. One of my approaches, I've always done this, is I use a team approach to identify goals and remedy constraints. Our Ag Center exchange groups are an example of that. But I've done this in relation to all of my extension and research programs in the region. Whenever we identify some sort of issue or constraint that we need to deal, I tend to get 4 or 5 people in a room and let them brainstorm and just throw it out at me. Tell me what you know and what you would like to see happen. And based on all that, then we try to allocate resources as strategically as we possibly can. We all know that resources aren't going to be plentiful. I would love to say and make the promise that I'll give everybody everything they need, but that's not realistic. We have to look very closely at our resources and allocate them as strategically as possible. And I'll go back to my whole idea of these collaborations, whether they be multi-state or multi-discipline within the state, doesn't matter. Those sorts of resources, I think, can have a much bigger payoff than an individual. I mean, I've been there. I was a scientist for 25 years. And if you let me, I would tell you how you needed to give me everything under the sun. But that always wasn't the most strategic allocation. Also, partner with faculty. I feel very strongly that my role is to facilitate research programs, work with the faculty to facilitate their programs, give them every opportunity for success. I think some people misunderstand the role sometimes, but our purpose, we don't hire people to watch them fail. That's too big an investment. We hire people to watch them succeed. And I feel the role as director of the experiment station is to facilitate that opportunity for success and to facilitate their quest for resources. You know, if they have an idea on how to get resources, I'm willing to listen every time. Also, I very firmly believe in listening. I have a very open door policy. All the faculty in my region know that. I tell them all the time, as much as I hate cell phones sometimes, this thing is with me 24/7. They can call me, email me, text me, whatever they want, anytime they want. I tell them on the weekends, it may be a couple hours, but you'll hear from me one way or another. Also, I'm a firm believer that you solicit and value the opinions of others. I'm not an expert in anything, and I don't proclaim to be. I'm a good plant pathologist, and I can probably hold my ground with most plant pathologists. Pretty good row crop production scientist, and I can deal with that pretty good. But what do I know about food safety? What do I know about entomology? What do I know about biodiesel? Not very much, okay? I can go out and read the literature as much as the next guy and get up to speed. But I believe firmly that you have valuable people in your organization that are experts in various areas. You need to use them, okay? And I take the approach that I'm willing to listen. I have an open door policy. I want your opinions. I want your ideas. That'll better help me formulate where we need to go. I also throw in one caveat. I have one of my faculty members one time, when I said that, he said, yeah, sure, I told you some things, you never did anything. Doesn't mean I'm going to do everything you tell me. It just means I'm going to put that in the bank with all the other information and make a decision. So lastly, in summary, what am I going to do? I'm going to lead in an open and collaborative manner based on trust and mutual respect, with the idea of pursuit of excellence always in mind. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Yes, sir.
Early on, you said that you looked over budgets and rough idea of grant proposals.
Yeah.
With the idea of possibly telling somebody that they couldn't do the project that they were proposing. I was wondering how often do you have to tell somebody no?
It's very rare, but every once in a while one will come through where I might have an agronomist tell me he's going to do water quality research, and I'll ask him, what's your background in water quality? Do you have the equipment, facility to do that? Those kind of things. Very rare, but every once in a while you do. We have a couple scientists that are very desperate for funding, and they start applying for just about anything under the sun because they know they need funding, and they try to make it work. I had a scientist who the grant had something to do with educating minorities about science. And the gist of her proposal was she was going to do nano particle research, and then the part to address the need of the grant was, and I'll have a weekly session at some school with the minority kids and talk to them about science. And I'm like, where's the connect between these two? I don't get it. But it's very rare, not very often. We don't want to discourage grant writing in any way, shape, or form. Sure.
Can you start a phrase no,
No, I don't know. Yes, sir.
I really like your comment on the way you value relationships between research and teaching. What are the key sharing with you in relationships between research and
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, when I got into this profession, I actually always thought I was going to be teaching. Okay, I ended up with a 100% research appointment. But I will tell you, during that 25 years I had that 100% research appointment, I always did extension work. Okay, I'll get to your answer in a minute. But it was not unusual. When you're at a research station, the producer's going to call you and ask questions, or the homeowner's going to come to you and say, hey, what about, I've got a problem on my roses or whatever, and you deal with them. You don't say, I'm not extension, call somebody else. You go deal with it. Also, I did teaching. Like I said, when I got out of graduate school, I thought I was going to, be a teacher, and I was really excited about that prospect. But as things turned out, that didn't happen. But while I was at LSU, I did teach. I taught in courses on main campus routinely. I gave seminars. Also at LSU in Shreveport, I developed and instructed a plant pathology course for their department. Most of the kids coming into that department thought they were all going to be doctors. They were all pre-med, pre-vet, and after about 1 or 2 semesters, most of them realized that that's not going to happen. What am I going to do now? So they were trying to beef up some of their plant and natural science areas, and I taught a class there. And I still teach master gardeners. So 2 weeks ago, I taught a master gardener class because I like that interaction with them. But I think, I think most scientists would say to you that they really enjoy the teaching component. They like interacting with students. Also, for me, I like teaching at LSUS because it provided me an opportunity to have students come and work for me and to get further along. I think that it's vital. Somebody has to do the teaching, and I think in many instances the researchers are some of the best people to do that because they're out there, they're in it, and they know what's going on. I am aware of the issues. You have the same issues that we have at the Ag Center, almost identical. We have these split appointments. They're 60 or 70% teaching on the campus side and 30% research here, or vice versa. But I think they're important, and we have to find a way to make those things work. Does that answer your question? Yes, sir.
Currently, on this campus, those who hold tenure are people with faculty
Mm-hmm.
Basically, on this campus, there are 4 research students throughout the state who hold tenure, a couple of administrators hold tenure. In a time of budget tightening, I can see these departments coming to you and saying, you know, we need flexibility in our hires, and it might be a lot easier if we cut back on the single track appointments on the UA and have fewer of our faculty single track. What would be your advice on that?
Well, he would be the boss, and in the end, he would make the decision. But my advice would be to rethink that a little bit. I'm a product of a tenured system. I know, the upsides of tenure, and I think that, we need to consider that. I think sometimes your applicant pool is not as good if you're advertising non-tenure, because if you're somebody that's pretty good, you're going to go to where you can get tenure. Why not? It's a no-brainer, unless you have some other constraints that prevent that. I think you also run the risk with non-tenure people, are they going to stay? If they don't have that contract, they could up and leave on you at any moment. So I think you need to think about that a lot. I think that the elephant in the room is this, and this is why people get excited about tenure, and that is there's that perception. You get tenure and all of a sudden you become a lazy dog and you do nothing. So I think the key is what you have to do is develop a very strong post-tenure evaluation and review system. If you do that, you eliminate a lot of that fear of tenure. And that would be my suggestion. Maybe we should devote some time to developing that. Yes, sir. Well, I think they're very similar to what you would have pre-tenure. You have to maintain a publication record. You have to maintain quality teaching credentials, although that would be handled from the campus side. I think you have to continue to pursue grants. You have to be engaged with your professional society and do those things associated with that, editing papers, whatever it might be. They're all really the same things. And so it shouldn't be rocket science to do that. You've already come through a system that values those things. We're just saying continue them. We have a system in Louisiana. I'll tell you how ours works. It's basically a 4-year process. Too long, in my opinion. We have a system whereby if your annual evaluation is unsatisfactory twice, 2 years in a row, then you undergo post-tenure review, and then you have 2 years to fix it. I think 4 years is a little bit too long. I think what our system does is pretty good, but I think we need to shorten that time frame a little bit, because for some people 4 years, I can retire. By the time you get to me, I'll be out of here. So have at it. Yes, sir. Well, I'd like to think we find a nice balance, okay? And also, I think we need to look at one of the issues I think that we deal with in evaluations all the time is different faculty members have different things, okay? If you're, for example, a breeder, you're not going to just crank out a bunch of publications as a breeder. It's not going to happen. So, I'm going to expect that breeder to do some of the other things, be active in his professional societies, pursuing some funding out there to keep his program going. So I'm going to put a little less emphasis on publications there than I would for if I had somebody who was a molecular biologist and worked in the lab and could crank out an experiment every month. I would expect a lot more publications from him. So you've got to look at what their responsibilities are. How much teaching do they have? You know, some things like that we have to consider. And I know that when you start doing that, that creates issues, you know, because everybody wants to compare, well, this guy got it with only this many publications, and you have all those issues. But I think, you know, you just have to look at all those things. I don't think you can have a rock, you know, something written in stone that says this is the way it is. Yes, sir.
How active would you see yourself being at national level and setting funding priorities? The root of the question comes, I'm sure you heard through the faculty in the last round of different proposals. It was oftentimes hard to find folks even to submit to things.
Yeah.
So, things change that to make it relevant.
Well, you know, I would do everything I could to advocate for Arkansas and try to make sure that there are some outlets and avenues for the issues and problems that we're dealing with Arkansas. Now, in the end, that's why I say about lining up with the scientific roadmap and those sorts of things, because that's supposedly our guideline on how we fund projects and establish priorities. And that's why I made a point of that. I think you have to look at that and be familiar with that document. That document, they have the 7 grand challenges, but there's a lot in there if you look at it real closely. It should cover most things. And my expectation is that when they put out these RFPs, that those are the things they're going to be asking for. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. We've done a lot of talking about 9-month appointments for faculty. Our concern is for faculty at research stations and some of those people, it's really hard to go to a 9-month arrangement. It's almost impossible. So we're not sure that that structure fits for everybody. It may fit for some scientists, and we have some scientists who actually want that. You know, they're fine with 9 months, then they sort of take the summer off. You know, they still work. They don't just totally walk off, but they have a lot more flex time to be with their families and those sorts of things. I think it's certainly something to consider, but you'd almost have to do case by case. I don't think you could do one size fits all, but I think that's certainly something to talk about. We offer, if we go to a 9-point in Louisiana, what we offer is, I think it's 11/12 of your salary or something like that. It's not a direct reduction. We give them a little bit on top. Thank you for your time. I'll be around for a few minutes.